George Washington was the first president. John Adams was the first vice president to be president and despised of the position of the vice presidency. Thomas Jefferson was the only president to ever run against his president. He ran against John Adams in the 1800 election and was Adams' vice president. James Madison was the first president to be president during a war. James Monroe was the first president to visit a state that he hadn't won in the previous election. He lost Maine in 1816, but visit Maine. John Quincy Adams was the first father-son pair. Andrew Jackson was the first and to this day only president to be a POW. Martin Van Buren was the first, would be the last sitting vice president until Ronald Reagan's vice president, George Bush, to be elected. William Henry Harrison was the first president to die in office. John Tyler was the first president to assume to the presidency without being elected. James K. Polk was the first president to fulfill all of his campaign promises. Zachary Taylor was the first president who actually wanted to run, who was a war hero. He initially thought about running for president, yet Andrew Jackson and George Washington were military heroes but never wanted the presidency. Zachary Taylor wanted the position since he became pretty popular. Millard Fillmore was the last Whig to serve as president. Franklin Pierce died very young at age 64. After losing the re-election, he said that, quote, "There's nothing to do but get drunk." James Buchanan was the first president and only to never be married. Abraham Lincoln was the first president to be assassinated. Andrew Johnson was the first president to be impeached. Ulysses S. Grant was the first president to have a park named after him. Rutherford B. Hayes had his voice recording, but the recordings were lost. James Garfield was the first president to get an assassination attempt just over 100 days while in office. Now, Abraham Lincoln was the first president to get an assassination attempt, though, but his assassination attempt was during his second term. Garfield's assassination attempt was during his first. Grover Cleveland was the first president to serve 2 non-consecutive terms. He won in 1884, lost in 1888, and won again in 1892. He would be the first to run with this distinction until Donald Trump would win a non-consecutive second term in 2024. Benjamin Harrison was the first president to be succeeded and preceded by the same man, the other being Joe Biden, who would be succeeded and preceded by Donald Trump. William McKinley was the last Civil War veteran to serve as president. Theodore Roosevelt was the first president to be wounded by an assassin but survive. William Howard Taft was the first president to go from president to the Supreme Court. He was appointed by Warren Harding. Woodrow Wilson was the first Democrat in nearly 2 decades to be elected. Warren G. Harding was the first president to die before his father. Calvin Coolidge was the first president to be sworn in by a former president. He was sworn in by Chief Justice William Howard Taft. Herbert Hoover was the first president to be hated more than any previous president. In fact, some say even speculate that Hoover was hated more than Buchanan, but there's no evidence to prove it. Franklin D. Roosevelt is the only president to serve more than 2 terms. Due to the war and the Great Depression still going, Roosevelt ran for an unprecedented third term. Harry S. Truman was the first president since Andrew Jackson to have three presidents were born during Truman's presidency. Dwight D. Eisenhower was the first president to not get wounded in a war. He never got wounded in World War II that I could find. John F. Kennedy was the first Roman Catholic president, but was the second Roman Catholic to be nominated by the Democrats, the last being Al Smith in 1828. Nearly 30 years prior, Lyndon Johnson was the first vice president and first president to be sworn in on an airplane. Richard Nixon is the only president to resign, largely due to Watergate. Gerald Ford was the first president to never be elected by the public, meaning to be appointed by the president to fill the empty seat for vice president. He also never got elected as the president. And he also was the only president to be targeted for an assassination attempt twice in 1 month. Jimmy Carter was the first president to be born in a hospital. Ronald Reagan was the oldest president. For 32 years, he would remain the oldest president. George Bush was the first acting president. Bill Clinton was the first president to send an email. George W. Bush was the first father-son pair since the John Quincy and John Adams. Barack Obama was the first African-American president. Donald Trump is the only president to this day to have never held a public office, never been elected to a public office, or had military experience. Other presidents such as Zachary Taylor, Dwight D. Eisenhower, and Ulysses S. Grant, and George Washington haven't had any political experience, but served in the military. Herbert Hoover haven't been elected, but did serve in the administration of Wilson, Harding, and Coolidge. Joe Biden was the longest serving president. He served as the senator for 32 years. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe.